Throughout Section 5 of Module 2, we will be talking about shared housing options and key policies and procedures to keep in mind for rental assistance programs. When we talk about shared housing arrangements, we are talking about two or more unrelated households living together that are allowable under the HOPWA program. Shared housing can often be a cost-effective alternative to individual housing arrangements. It is up to the grantee whether or not the rental assistance program will allow shared housing arrangements of eligible households. Shared housing arrangements, however, should be voluntary. Further, the grantee must describe the processes they will use to carry out the consolidated plan, grant proposal, or other document that will be reviewed and approved by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. There are a number of key policies and procedures to keep in mind when working with rental assistance programs. Here we have 12 different key policies and procedures to take into account. We'll talk about a few of them in more detail, but you can always reference the sources provided at the end of this page to get more information. All programs should have clear client eligibility standards outlined. A client intake plan should be in place that clearly guides intake to the rental assistance program and ensures equal opportunities for program access for the targeted population. HOPWA regulations require a formal process for handling the termination of participants from HOPWA assistance. Procedures for termination should address termination due to violation of program requirements and termination in the event of death of the HOPWA-eligible participant when there are surviving family members. These procedures should be reviewed and signed by rental assistance program participants at intake, and the signed document should be kept in each participant's file. Procedures for termination of rental assistance should also be outlined for serving and transitioning surviving family members who were living in the unit with a HOPWA-eligible client receiving rental assistance at the time of his or her death. HOPWA regulations require that housing and supportive services to survivors continue for a reasonable grace period not exceeding a year. The regulations also allow programs to assist the family with housing information and moving expenses. When we're talking about program or house rules, a project-based rental assistance or family-based master leasing program, these rules may be in form of an addendum to the tenant's lease. In a tenant-based rental assistance or scattered site master leasing program, the rules should be provided as a part of the client participation agreement or statement of client responsibilities. When talking about moving prerequisites, clients are not permitted to locate a unit and sign a lease without staff consent. A grantee or sponsor is responsible for making sure that the unit meets various regulatory requirements and is appropriate for the client to rent and inhabit. Another key policy and procedure is housing suitability. In order to ensure compliance with HOPWA habitability standards, the rental assistance program staff should have a formal process for inspection of rental units prior to authorizing client lease execution and move-in. The process should include subsequent inspections at least annually during assistant occupancy. Occupancy standards refer to the guidelines set by a housing program governing the number of bedrooms allowed for households of different sizes and composition. Once a client has found a unit, it is important that policies and procedures relate to tenant lease requirements, as we want to make sure that the unit that has been located by the client is suitable and meets the program's rent standard, HOPWA habitability standards, lead-based paint, and rent reasonableness guidelines. The lease must be reviewed and approved by program staff. Rental assistance programs may develop a preferred lease format that landlords must use, or they may allow landlords to use their own leases as long as the leases do not contain provisions prohibited under the program. Before the client signs the lease and payment of rental assistance begins, agencies must ensure that a contract of participation agreement is signed between the administering agency and the owner of the unit in question. The landlord contract should not list the HOPWA program by name, nor should it refer to the HIV/AIDS program generally. A contract of this type should be executed for each unit occupied under the rental assistance program, and a copy should be placed in each client's individual file. We have briefly reviewed some of the key policies and procedures, but we do encourage you to please reference the source found under this presentation for additional details on each of these bullet points. This concludes Section 5 of Module 2. We now ask that you please complete the assessment below, covering all material presented in Module 2. A passing score of 80% or above is needed before proceeding to Module 3. You may take the assessment as many times as you need.